Hello, David. Long time no speak. It's been, I don't even know when it was last time, but it's been a while again.
This has been a long time, yes.
Yeah,
So,
life keeps being busy, and then there's these gaps in between, and it's a bit always when mostly I find a bit more space that I also have the mental space to say, okay, let's schedule another podcast time, and
yes,
so there we there we are.
there we are. And yeah, this time I'm bringing something that's been drumming my heart for the past month or so. Um, yeah, which is connected to men's work, which I've again been more involved in, and this sense that there's an update to be brought in, or let's say there's a gap that I think, like, if I speak more from a business marketing perspective, there's a gap that can be filled, um, which is bringing a deeper understanding of the nervous system into men's work, and bringing this frame that you've talked about quite a lot and that's influenced my thinking quite a lot as well, around this split between power and love. And I'll just put one more topic in, or that's been on my mind as like one potential way to frame this idea or project, which is around people pleasing. Because I think it's one place where the split between power and love becomes really visible. Yeah, and also because there's a known methodology called No More Mr. Nice Guy, which has had a big success in men's work. And I actually met the author, and he's a really cool guy. And yeah, the sense is there's an update that could happen, and where I feel called to contribute, and where I also feel there's a lot that you can bring in. And yeah, basically this right now is a first step in that direction. And it's gonna be a bit of like a mapping the field and seeing the different elements that are there, and maybe seeing that there's more clarity that needs to be brought in. But that's kind of the frame for this conversation. And yeah, also maybe the last thing I want to say is, so we will talk about these topics in the context of men more specifically, and at the same time the principles we talk about apply to any human being. Yeah, and yet I would enjoy to have this frame that we're talking about these things in the context of men and men's work.
Mhm.
Yeah, so with that, I'm very curious to hear from you. Um, on one side, like, how do these topics live inside of you? What comes up in you when you hear this? And then also, what do you sense are the important elements if we want to approach this topic and we want to bring this kind of update to men's work? What would you say is crucial to understand and to work on and to integrate?
Mm. Yeah, wow. As usual, there's a lot already in there in the intro. And so first of all, I'm happy to get started with the conversation because also when I'm listening to you, I feel like yeah, there's so many elements that totally speak to like that drum my heart, as you've been saying, or string like a strike a chord deep inside my heart and my being, and also the work that I've been doing since ever in some way. Um, and so the first comment is, I think what I find it a little curious to say, maybe we need an update in men's work.
Mm,
um, because I somehow I agree, and at the same time I feel like, well, that's at least what I and some people that I know closer have been doing since ever, basically. So,
mhm,
and when I feel into that, and I'm happy to contribute if there is an update that goes wider, and
mm,
like I'm updating myself all the time, like my thinking and about this is still very consistent. If I look back for all the
Mm,
20 plus years I've been working with this, um, actively, in more than 25 years ish being in the field and doing work on myself. And so that's kind of consistent, and still there's more and more nuance
mhm,
that comes in, and a deeper understanding of what we actually talk about. And so one thing that I feel where truly maybe an update is needed is maybe also on the language, on the vocabulary
mhm,
we're using. So people pleasing, nice guy, or the bad boys, or all these kind of things are good, like buzzwords, because we can have a little first sense of what we're about, or even power and love. So I'm a little bit in search also maybe for a good verbal, or like language framing of what we're actually talking about. That
mhm,
includes, for example, a more nervous system related understanding, and also attachment based understanding, and that maybe can even be applied to wider sociological trends and how society works and how we create societies. Because I see this as not something that just as a personal inquiry for people or for men, but how we use these kind of dimensions of life in general strokes, also as humanity. And there's big, I've been speaking a lot about that, and also here in the podcast about like societal trends or cultural trends. Um, so there's a lot in there, and
mm,
maybe we can even start. I'd be curious even to hear what you feel when you say what this relates to when you say people pleasing, for example.
mhm,
What we're speaking, because that's a big trend also, and a lot of women actually talk about this as a very,
mhm.
very important thing. If you're more prone to people pleasing, then da 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 dot dot dot. So which I
Yeah,
think, as far as I notice it, it's also a big trend on social media. So people are more talking about it.
yeah,
And there's the realms also where it really goes into the relational arena,
mm,
when it becomes a more general way of life. And so I'm curious to hear that, and then we can maybe work out a bit more. What is it, in my understanding, we're actually talking
mhm.
about?
Yeah. Maybe one last thing before we go there. When you say language update, uh, do you mean to find a language that can reach a wider audience and that makes sense? Or like what would be the drive behind saying maybe we need a language update?
Good question. I mean, so what I would love is a language that has less shame and judgmental bias
Mm,
in there, because people
yeah,
pleasing is already like it's a
yeah,
lot that happens just when we say that.
yeah,
And also the no more Mr. Nice Guy, and
yeah.
it implies just don't be nice, be a bad boy, or something. And at the same time, that's been also a journey in my lifetime. I'm a bad marketing person, obviously, because these buzzwords are catchy, and they're great, but they're, so if we have a very nuanced and very differentiated language, maybe that doesn't translate well into the mainstream. Actually, it's like, okay, you need to read an academic book before you can understand that the headlines.
Yeah,
um, so neither of these are great.
yeah, I got you.
Curious if there's a way, and maybe just by talking about it, that's, I know, like, I think for you as well, where creativity comes online
Mm,
mostly. Maybe there's something that we get more to the heart of it, and
yeah.
not imply a shameful why you're still doing that,
Hmm.
and see more that's the nervous system related approach, to see this not as like failures in your character, in your personality makeup,
Yeah,
but as necessities, and also like transgenerational legacies
yeah,
that we're just living because that's what was given to us, and that also what made the most sense to us at certain times in life. And it's not just something you can just decide not to do anymore, because that's one of the downsides that I see with the no more nice guy approach. People say like, oh no, I'm not going to be that guy anymore. I'm going to be something else,
Yeah.
which mostly is short-lived.
From this day on, never
Exactly.
again.
I read the book, now I changed.
Did all the action steps and now
Which which
no more
can which can
mess.
happen to some degree, but like the other side will also then like come up, and mostly, so that's already a preview. Where I see this with man is like they're they take in the advice and it's good, and then they apply it to certain areas of your life, like relationships or work or friendships, or how you just make yourself visible in the world. And mostly in some arenas or for some time it works, but then when you run into deeper existential attachment dynamics, which this relates to, like how do you get to feel security and connection with yourself, then suddenly you hit the wall again, and then you revert, and then you feel like, oh fuck, it all didn't work out, and actually it didn't really change. And so that's my
Yeah.
passion always, to maybe go a slower path sometimes, but something that stays more sustainable
Yeah.
rather than just a quick fix thing.
Hmm.
As
I
usual,
have
my nuanced, differentiated integration.
hmm I have such a like there's something I have such a love for this masculine way of learning and applying like this like straight on in one direction until you crash somewhere, then you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess I need to go somewhere else. Like it's such a there's so much power in there. And yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of appreciation for this kind of learning. Um,
Fully given. It's not that this shouldn't happen.
yeah,
It's just once you hit the wall, it's good that maybe something else is also there.
yeah, totally. I agree. So your question was like what is my understanding when I say people pleasing?
Yeah, when you say like you've been working a lot, or I heard you talk more about this lately, and yeah, what's your take on it? What do you experience there or see in other people? And
Hmm. Yeah, so maybe the first thing that I can say is when you talk about the language thing is when I say like, let's say I'm a people pleaser in recovery, uh, I don't feel ashamed about it. So I'm wondering if there's a way to use these words without the accompanying shame. And the understanding that I have of this pattern is that I learned very early on to manage the emotions of the people around me as a way to feel safe. As in, I am overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the people around me. And as a way to navigate that and to reduce the stress that comes from like unexpected emotional intensity, my attention is a lot like on the outside and on like, okay, what is going on for the people and what can I do to make sure that they feel okay and well and they don't erupt. And and I mean such an intelligent mechanism to learn that if otherwise I did not feel safe growing up. So and there are a lot of gifts that come with that let's say survival mechanism, which is like super strong empathy and being really receptive to what's going on around me, which if integrated with other qualities is such a superpower. So I also have a lot of appreciation for that path that I went on. But I can see how much how much of an energy leak this pattern can be as well. Um, like how it takes quite a lot of energy from my system to do all of this, to do this kind of managing. And it comes with certain costs. Like it comes with the cost of uh it's harder to feel clearly what I want, like to have that in the first place, like, well, this is what I want, and then I can connect to what other people want. But it's almost like when that pattern is really on, I don't even get to that place of like, here, well, here's what I want. And then it's hard to live a life that feels truly aligned because I'm more responding to what's coming from the outside than like following what matters to me. And then on a more general level, like I just there's the energy that goes into appeasing the people around me. If I can reclaim that and consciously use it for the things that matter to me in life, there's so much, like there's so much more energy that I have available for the things that really matter to me. So I think I look at this as like an energy leak that if fixed, to use some really harsh language, or if improved even, there's just so much more available for me to express my potential and show up in the world in a way that I want to. And so if I'm able to do that, and if I'm able to counterbalance this deep empathy and this sensitivity, this receptivity with the ability to really ground myself within myself and the ability to assert myself, uh, then I mean, I'm a really powerful human being and a really powerful man. So yeah, there's just this sense of like, whoa, there's so much there to be uh almost like a to be I don't know, like the word return comes in, like yeah, like energy that I can bring back into myself and then just yeah, just operate from a much more empowered place.
Hmm. It's nice. It's nice hearing your perspective in that, and I feel there's a lot. It's very there's already that integration that I would speak of is already fully, mostly fully present there. So there's a lot there. So I'm just giving you a little bit my I can weave my personal story into it, but I'll just give you a bit my maybe add it in certain
Hmm.
cases. So I found it cool that you already started describing people pleasing as a form of strength and empowerment and
Mm.
something to be ashamed of. And lucky for you, but I think at least that's what I meet a lot with men, but also with women more and more, that it's not so much seen anymore as a, or not so much seen as an asset, but something you really need to fix and work out.
Hmm.
And comes with the territory, but like, so I think that's already a beautiful thing to take it out of the, oh my God, what am I doing there?
Mm.
And wow, you can't do that, which has a lot of self-help, like quick, don't do that, it will mess with your life, Instagram posts. And to say, okay, there is a lot of um, capacity in there. And it served the purpose, as you said, it served the purpose of managing something in yourself. And that's the super important element, because sometimes there's still a confusion that people think, yeah, that makes one a really nice and caring person. So I mean, why wouldn't that be a good thing, that you start to really take care of other people? You're there, you're less selfish, you're less driven by your own egoic needs, and you're more considerate. It makes you a
Yeah.
good citizen, a useful citizen of the of a society. But, but the thing is, like early on, he said, like in order to take care of others' states and emotions, but the really important thing is that that never works.
Yeah.
It's and that's the tragedy in my mind of, if we stick with the word people pleasing, that it's trying to manage something that can't be managed,
Yeah.
but it comes out of that, either of that choice of like, either going to be swamped here and overwhelmed or exposed to unpredictability or volatility of my caregivers, or I find something to already preemptively know what's needed over there so that they're a little bit more calm, and then we'll be a bit more loving, or at least I'm not going to make a mess. I'm not going to make a, I'm not going to start a riot, and not going to be a nuisance to them. So I'm like placating the whole environment. And so I think always it's probably most people already know, but still it's like an ongoing differentiation to see what is a real motivation in there to be really caring for other people, and what is a survival instinct of like, wow, only if I disconnect from my own needs and try as much as I can to be there for the needs of others, I'm going to be okay. Because it's a super, super deep selfish motivation. And
Yes.
but it's often very, very deeply buried. And people, when they are very identified with this, and you tell them that's very selfish, they go like, "Whoa, no, 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 no! That's the last thing I want to be. That's actually that's what they want to avoid being seen and identified
Yes.
as the like that's the worst nightmare. No, no, no! I'm not selfish. I'm just like I want to be sure that you're good. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
what does that serve? So it's not an adult, mostly it's not based on an adult version of really relating of two adults.
Yeah.
And then it's also interesting that you said like I'm gonna be much more powerful when I'm really actually when I stop letting go of that habit. But then it's the question, can we be powerful with care and with heart?
Mhm.
And can we be caring and loving but with power, and not always have to switch one or the other off? And that's the so my journey somehow, as far back as I can think, actively working with people, and what motivated me, somehow I was always interested in integration. What if we can include more and not just choosing one or the other? And this framing of like that I came across like very, very early in my own journey of like that there's often especially in men, a split around the sex, which is more power oriented, my drive, my passion, my force, my wanting, which often is expressed in sexuality, and my care, my heart, my more tender places, also the places where I need, or where I authentically can feel other people, is often very disconnected, especially male sexuality. So originally there was always more like in body psychotherapy approaches, there was always more spoken in terms of like a character structure, where it often like a classical male characteristic of expressing oneself sexually, just wanting to have sex and not caring about the other very much, and not intimately or emotionally connect with the other.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, and sometimes people would emotionally connect and get more vulnerable, but then not have access to their drive and their power.
Yeah.
And that's still a lot of men that I've met um, struggle with that. So it's either you have a relationship where you feel safe, you feel like
Mm.
you feel authentically caring for the other, and vice versa, and you can bring yourself in, but there's not much eros, not much sex, not much passion going on. Or you feel like, wow, this is hot and sexy, and I'm like, oh, I can unleash my instincts and my animals, but it doesn't translate into a stable relationship because the emotional nurturance, or it's a bit disconnected. Like I want to have great sex, but like then need to go, need to go home.
A man's dream.
Yeah, a specific ways of a man's, yeah, or what was classically considered a man. That was like the
Yeah.
class two-dimensional cut-out piece of a man, the poster boy of being a man. No, it was like the Western guy, like Marlon Brando, or maybe I'm too old to John Wayne. I don't know what more
Even James Bond, I would say, is
like all the heroes.
yeah.
You know, they were never in steady relationships, but they always had affairs. Like they always
Yes.
had a hot girl, and then went out to save the world and chase the villains. You know, and so me personally, I'm also, I think I liked it when you said like a recovering people pleaser. Um, Even though in some ways on the more um, the arena of my life where I'm more on the outside, where I'm more visible, where it's not like my intimate relationship, I'm not necessarily very strongly been a people pleaser.
Mm,
Right, went for my things and was not being bullied around, which could come along with this. I knew how to assert myself. Yet in intimate relationships, and it was not clear to me at the beginning, I started to feel like, oh yeah, but that's actually over time, that's actually quite in place where I
mm,
kind of like would go out a little quicker to see what's happening over there. I used my skills,
mm.
um, even infused with a little bit of an arrogance of like, I know better what you need than you know for yourself.
Nice.
And sometimes that was even true. I mean,
Even
not,
worse.
yeah, even worse, like that sealed the fate. Um, but then only with time, I really figured like, oh, but then sometimes I don't clearly take a stance, or I'm afraid to go into conflicts. I'm afraid of the assumed consequences if I really say clearly what I want,
Mhm.
emotionally, sexually, wanting to do certain things in life with the other or for myself. Um, and so I had to accept over time, like, yeah, that is active in me, and tracing that back and understanding the origins of that, and still finding layers of that again and again, freshly, where and there's a lot of variations of how that can then how does that look how that looks like then in actual applied life in a man's life in relationships.
Mm,
And I still think like from my experience that a lot of men, even if they're not the classical types of the people pleasers, which one would think, when it comes to intimate relationships, a lot of men have those kind of
yeah,
traits in there. And there's lots more insecurity in men than one would, or women often even know about, because
yeah,
they don't share. When men are very shut down, that's often also comes out of that place, because the only way to manage that is like to not do anything, but that's not the same like not caring or not or asserting oneself.
yeah. Yeah, I think this is a really good point to get away from this idea that like this the nice guy is this like shy, super sensitive, caring, like that's the only type of man who experiences this challenge of people pleasing. Um, because I think that's also a way we can uh kind of like broaden the understanding of who can benefit from this understanding. And I agree with you. And I even think that for men who don't fit this category, it can in certain places be so much harder because no one would expect them to struggle with that. Like the gap is even bigger. Like they're probably being perceived as like this really powerful guy and he knows what he wants and he but then these places is yeah, there's like an even bigger tension between how they're being perceived, probably also how they want to be perceived, and then those places that just don't fit into their self-image.
Yes. And that's why, again, why originally it's been a long time I read the book or worked a little bit through the Mr. Nice Guy approach. Like it spoke, I think, big time to one, clearly to one way of expressing that.
Hmm.
And then bringing in the other dimension of, let's say, asserting oneself, power. And as you said before, sometimes it's a process, but sometimes it's just like clarity and practicing. That's super important. But it does not address, in my case, so well the larger split, also the suffering on the other side. And because sometimes there is men, as you said, and I mean, I worked with so many highly powerful executives and other men in leadership positions, for example, like so many, like who at least learned how to perform that, what looks like full confidence. And it's kind of crazy when you work with these people, like so pervasively how often they come up and say, like, I actually have imposter syndrome. If anybody really would see me, they would think I'm a fraud.
Yeah.
It's so painful. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a little bit also an expression of how we create powerful systems in the world, where it's actually not a display of real power. Because also when we talk about power here, it's like a split of version of the fullness of life. It's one way just to disconnect from something, which then makes me more functional. Because if I feel less, or I seem to care less, or just notice certain things less, then I can still go.
Yeah.
And that society, or especially corporate world, demands that a lot of us, and also rewards that a lot. And so you have these people that look like very functional, do their thing, can make tough decisions if necessary. Sometimes it bleeds also over into the work world, that it feels like really difficult to have the real confrontational, clear talk and stuff like this. But sometimes they can do it. But then when we go back and look what's the relational world like for them,
Yeah.
often it's either a flip side of power, is like they feel very powerless,
Yeah.
or the only way they have learned to kind of not get overwhelmed by a different world that doesn't work just by setting a goal and working through, which a relationship is not. It's not a project. They just have an Excel sheet and deadlines. Just need to power through with night shifts, and then it's going to be done. So to protect themselves for this kind of like unpredictability or overwhelm by just shutting down very much. And that's then the classical stereotype that the woman says, like, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't know how to be there and display his caring and not feel disempowered.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge suffering on that. And I think like as a societal trend, that was often also very much the classical traditional male that works, but like comes home, gets his meal served, and then meets his friends in the bar. He's a good man, decent man, but there's like very little emotional resonance to work with.
Yeah.
And then like the kind of humanistic movement of the 60s, and was like, okay, that we need to take off that repression of all this emotional stuff and then let this all out, which was a huge boon to society. And then man became more soft and caring and vulnerable often, but then often suddenly flipped to the other side. So we have this kind of pendulum thing going on. And I have to tell you, I still think we don't know many men
Yeah.
that they exist. It's not that it's not existing, but it's not so common where you really feel these two places of knowing how to stand my ground and take care of my own full self-expression. And there's an openness, the receptivity also to take in how my actions also are being perceived by others, and really allow my care to inform my decisions also, where these two places are vibrating at the same time. It's really not so much, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely lacking as a, like, I think we don't yet have this, and this is, I guess, connected to the fact that there's not that many men who embody this as like an orientation towards, like, we don't have a sort of societal agreement that that is what we want as men to aspire towards. And
Yeah.
just to give you one example, I just looked it up while you were speaking because I think it's such a telling uh telling expression of the split between power and love. Um, there's this guy called Jocko Willink. I don't know if you know him. He's like an ex-Navy SEALs guy, and he's quite popular in the manosphere. And he has this concept of extreme ownership. It's a book where he basically his frame is like he shares his stories from, being in the war and really strong stories, where he says, if you're a leader, you take responsibility for anything not going well. Like the whole frame is that's how you're a good leader. You never go into the place of like, well, it's your fault or something like this. It's always on you. And there is power in that, but like there's the other side completely missing of like the um I guess like acknowledging the limits of my own power and a quality of surrender and seeing that uh like there are many things happening that are outside of my control, and if I don't have any access at all to that place, I think my life is going to be quite miserable because I'm going to carry the weight of the whole world. And so, but that's like a concept that is like, wow, that's such a role model for how a man should be. And it's so fascinating because I can see like there's an appeal in that because also there's a simplicity. Like, yeah, you're responsible for everything happening in your life.
Hmm.
But yeah, I imagine life is not going to be that fun if that's the only frame that I have for understanding for things happening.
Well, that's fascinating. Never heard of it. So, what would you think? Like, what would be so people listening in to give them an idea? What would you think would be the symptom of this gone too far, or this is already taking it very far? So, if you live this,
Hmm.
and I could imagine this appeals to men before that feel a little bit like victimized by society and themselves and feeling like, oh my God. And then suddenly you get this surge of power because like, yes, because it's great. It's like, yes, there is one deep element of truth, or it's one truth of life. Like, it's up to you.
Yes.
So if you want to live your life fully, especially speaking to the masculine energy, take it in your own hands and don't blame others, don't blame life,
Yeah.
blame your parents or where you came from or circumstances.
Yeah.
Find the place of ownership and find agency, find your self-expression in there. And so if this goes on, all if this is your model of life,
Hmm.
the one tool that you have, so what could be a symptom of this where it doesn't work so well or has creates.
Well, if I think about it on a physical level, I imagine it creates a whole lot of tension, and there's probably not going to be a lot of space for like release for the ability to let go into something larger than me, because I guess in my understanding, it doesn't fit into the idea of extreme ownership. And yeah, I notice I don't want to straw man this because I've heard Jocko Willing speak. So I wanted to say it's probably going to be hard to have like a deep sense of humility for the greater forces of life because I take responsibility for everything. But to be honest, I think that Jocko Willing does have that sense of humility and understanding of the limitations of his own power. So, okay, so what I can say is I imagine his inner world, or a man who follows this, is probably not going to be a very compassionate place for the parts that feel disempowered. And so there's probably going to be a lot of fragmentation. And I know that this is part of one of his stories. He had this goal he set for himself to run a certain amount of lap somewhere or something like this, and like he broke his shin or both his shins, and he just kept on running, like
Yeah.
taped it together and kept on running. So yeah, I mean, on a more subtle emotional level, this, I mean, there's quite the impact that this probably has on different parts.
Yeah. That's interesting. So I don't know the guy, so I can't say anything to the person. Every person is more complex than the book that he writes, but it's very fascinating this concept. And so in my book, like this is the classical hero story again. Like we find this fascinating. Somebody broke his both shins and kept running, and like we read that's the people we want to make movies about them because it's like and or we find inspirational and like they show us what we humans are capable of. And I agree.
Yeah,
There's a lot in there that's very inspiring, not to be bogged down.
yeah,
And at the same time, again, from my own experience and having worked with like so many men, so many people already, and again, like a lot of, I know men like this leadership positions that are absolutely clearly committed to really care also for their project, their company, their people by total commitment. And it is very empowering. I sit sometimes there and like, oh man, like I could not do what you do. It's just impossible. Like I'm not fit for that. I'm not made for that.
hmm
But I also know I don't have to. So there's no competition in me anymore that used to be there.
hmm
Um, but it's also painful to feel the actual life of such a person. Not
yeah,
not always. I don't want to make it a black or white thing, but sometimes it's very painful physically, and it's not healthy in a sustainable way
yeah,
because your system will, energetically speaking, overheat and become very dense. Very, there's a lot of tension, and because you cannot, it's like you become a rock
yeah,
that cannot be penetrated by water anymore.
yeah,
And then you're just very dense, you're very durable, but you're really not nourished by life anymore.
yeah,
And so what totally disappears is like as you said, is compassion for vulnerability. And so again, it's very attractive for a time where a lot of men feel disempowered, disenfranchised, where we're drowning into a sensitivity spiral, which we misunderstand as like celebrating weakness, which is talked about before. Um, and so there comes in this other thing, and like everything is always has to be seen as a medicine for a specific situation or like a different information that makes the pendulum then go swing in the other side. But nothing in life that is not essential and integrated can be done to an extreme form without creating more consequences. Everything is an answer to something, but needs an answer to itself.
yeah,
And so what this creates is like this lack of compassion that splits parts of myself that would just want to sit down and scream or needs care. When I broke both my bones, I'm just using this as an example. And it's like,
yeah,
no, 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 no. And again, if this is serving a higher purpose in moments of when this there is no other option,
yeah,
then this is super inspiring.
yeah,
But if this becomes a mode of life that I always have to do that in order to prove to myself that's the way of being right on track,
yeah,
you're gonna hurt life tremendously yourself. And then just imagine having this guy as your father,
mm,
and he's going to be an amazing force of empowerment of empowerment in order to be able of capability. But what about when you're needing real relational support and comfort to be caring for the parts in you that just yeah are not governed by will? Inadvertently, that will create some pressure and shame on that part,
yeah,
and maybe you never hear it, but like this is just going to happen. And
yeah,
so there will be a split. And again, then there we are. We're in the split of something like the power in the heart, the compassion and the will. And then again, and then often the next generations live stronger with that split, or will rebel totally, or we'll feel hurt by it, or whatever story then unfolds.
Yeah.
So, and it is, I mean, it's a very noble aspiration to be really taking full ownership, but it always needs to be integrated again, not on the expense of the capacity. Because ownership also means like I take ownership of places where I cannot take ownership for,
Yeah.
and acknowledging the interdependence of life.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I sit myself at the top of creation and don't have any transpersonal dimension or God or whatever I want to use, that I say like, or life, you know, like I'm not owning up that the sun rises or doesn't.
Yes.
I bow to that because that's
Mm,
bigger to me. I don't own that my body works the way it works and that sometimes it needs to rest. I bow to that.
mm,
And then I take care of it because it sustains my life in the
mm,
best way possible.
mm. Yeah, and I guess the challenge with what you're talking about or what we're talking about the integration is it's not as simple as straightforward as, oh, well, you just go with extreme ownership and like that's your North Star. Like that's so much easier to follow for especially for this like driven masculine side that just like wants
Exactly.
one thing to follow. And so I guess like maybe that's a question we can take into future conversations around this. And I'm just seeing the time. Um, how how can this side that just wants clear guidance and structure, how can we include that more? Because I think that's one of the things that can get lost with nuance and with this like, embracing the not knowing and the complexity and these kind of things. Like, okay, but like what does that mean right now for
I
me?
hear you mocking my not knowing passion.
Also mine. Because I think that's the place where somewhat understandably people are like, like I'm thinking about the men's conference where I was, and I led people into a similar place where I kind of described like the different elements that are needed to have mature conversations where it takes like clarity and being able to assert myself, but also receptivity and openness, and like one of the responses was like, okay, but like what does that mean practically? How is that going to help society get better or more understanding? And so I think it's important to honor this place in men that like wants like clear things to execute.
Yes, I 100% know what you're talking about. And I don't fully agree that we have to cater to this,
Hmm.
because I do very much believe that
Hmm.
this, yeah, but now I need to, what, like, so what am I going to do with it now? Like, we need to make the world a better place. So, how is this going to help me? I don't think that this is the authentic, integrated,
Uh-huh.
masculine response to the situation. This is
Yeah.
something we know so well from
Yeah.
millennia. Like, but okay, now we need to do something. Who says that doing needs to be disconnected from being? And sometimes maybe you don't know what to do, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So just to
price that
reframe.
also a little, we overly quick, like a little too fast. We price that also as
Yeah.
like that's the masculine. Like, yeah, if doing is very clear and it comes from your inner connection, you don't have to ask anybody, so what am I going to do? If I need to be given what to do, I'm already struggling with connecting to myself in some way. And I know this is a high ideal and high vision, but I
Yeah.
also want to be clear not to create a dichotomy again too
Yeah.
quickly, where we then need to, it's like you accept the bug in the system and then you need to cater to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think I meant more not to cater to it, but to honor this drive and to find a way to include it in this, that it doesn't feel excluded in this process. Because I think that that's one
Yeah.
thing that can happen if we go super nuanced and yeah.
So if one takes that in, you have a lot to do for the rest of your life practicing this. It's not like, okay, now I know what to do and I'm doing it. Practicing this can very well speak. I mean, all the Western traditions are full of it. You have a lot to do to get this to, you know, allow more integration in and practice, apply. Yeah. So it's good we can hold that place a little bit, but it's a cool conversation.
Yeah. Nice. Any parting words from your side before we wrap this
No, just
one up?
curious, what's the update that we're cooking up if it wants to come?
Nice.
Thank
Great.
you,
Well,
David.
thank you.